The argument. The day you could not be found, I had been writing, but the phone call came. The work shrank and my hands abandoned everything, only held my head as if to weigh it and find it wanting. Weigh this. I sat soundless, as others might in prayer, but hands useless, not knowing where, a pause in which nothing more could be undertaken, an arc of waiting. Someone had seen your car, a stranger, hundreds of miles from us. This is how it comes, out of the unrelenting distance. A whole 24 hours on the same spot, they thought, parked by the ocean. Word that rang pain from the voice of that policewoman, who didn't like to utter it. Accent so thick I could not at first understand her, though in my own vernacular, as if the ear rejected clarity, as if delay could lessen revelation. The ocean. We knew then, suddenly, such a day was always hovering, like something just out of the eye's corner, ambush or pounce, a narrative available, ready for any of us. Cliché we must counter with invention, with option after option, hit on from the thousands open for continuation, racking collective brain for argument, moment last seen or spoken, to contradict the report, building our case for cosmic error. He's a surfer. He's just gone back there for another session. Or, engine trouble? Got to lift home with a mate? The more we could talk you up, the more we hardened, emboldened. I dug out a brush and scrubbed a week's worth of kitchen, of bathroom, anything left undone as if uncared for, or ignored, to bluff, to show that cold cross-examiner there was someone, yes, someone in control here. No ground to be gained, no substance to these allegations of loss. Our logic fending him off with success this time, but still too close to the real thing for my liking. The poem's called The Argument because it's part of a broader idea about the argument, I suppose, between life and death, between life force and death in general. And it came out of getting a phone call from the police, the Geraldton police, a few years ago, telling us that my brother-in-law's car had been seen 24 hours parked on the same spot by the ocean, and they just wanted to know if everything was all right. And of course, when someone's a surfer, you sort of get a really bad chill inside when you get a call like that. I mean, any call from the police is pretty scary, but so we came up with lots of reasonings of maybe it wasn't really there for 24 hours, maybe he went away and came back and so on. He did turn out to be all right, but we went through a terrible day of trying to keep busy, just waiting to know what had happened to him. And, it struck me at the time that call comes in various ways for everybody close to us. There's going to come a day and we never think about those days. Fortunately, it wasn't that day. The reason that poem is the title poem, I suppose, is that a lot of the themes in there are to do with... it's not a morbid book in terms of being about death, but all of the poems in the book are about that kind of struggle. So there are poems about growing vegetables in the garden and the sort of cornucopia of good things that come from the life force, if you like, and those brushes with mortality that all of us experience. So it's like an argument between the two, a tension, yeah. Well, I think it differs and it changes. It's always been able to mutate, if you like, from bush ballads that people say in pubs, or things like the Bush Slam, in fact, that was on television recently, where poets went to communities all around Australia and did their thing. And then you get the performance poetry scene as well. So I think it's a lot more alive than people think. It isn't just limited to the printed classical book of poetry, though that's always there too. Most people are still studying it in school. And you get individual books that people treasure that mean something to them through their whole lives, even if they've never studied them. So it's probably in some ways not everyone's thing, but in other ways there's a level of poetry in everyone's life. Everyone knows a poem. I think it depends how you present it. I think that there is that sort of shock from people, and that's probably true in all the arts because, Australians tend to be a fairly practical people. And so if someone says, I'm going to be an actor or I'm going to be a rock star or whatever, there's that same kind of response. I don't think that's isolated to poetry. Maybe poetry by some people is seen as a bit sort of abstruse or airy-fairy, but as I say, most people have also got a poem in their lives or a level of it. I never really had any negative response, I think, because my mum always loved reading and my dad was into, I suppose, bush ballads, bush poetry, that sort of thing. And I grew up thinking it was a normal thing to do, which is probably why I do it. But, it's not the worst thing your kid could come home and say they want to do. Obviously, I'm married to the poet John Kinsella, so he's a huge influence for me, and we have a very close sort of working life together as well as a personal one. We kind of read each other's work, and we might make comments or whatever, but very much work separately and very differently. But it would be true to say that each of us reads what the other has written. I tend to be more shy and sort of cover up until I've completely finished. But yeah, so there's a real bouncing off. But the kind of work we do is so different that I don't think there's a lot of crossover. But you're living through the same experiences as well. So if you go somewhere and see something, you've both seen it, and we find we might write about the same thing completely differently. But in terms of other poets, a lot of Australian poets like Judith Wright that I read at school, Emily Dickinson, probably Plath and Hughes as well. Just more poets than I could name, in fact. But a lot of Australian poets, we were lucky enough to study them at school, and so I was of that generation where people were already studying Australian literature. Before that, they tended to study British, overseas work, but we did both. So. There's always been something going on in Perth. It seems to be pretty continuous. If one reading closes down, a whole lot of new ones spring up. So it seems to be pretty vibrant. And also a lot of self-generated publishing of chapbooks and little things like that, where people take stuff into their own hands and do it, which I think is really great. It's very lively. Yeah. My first publications were with Fremantle Press, but I published in journals. I started publishing in my teens, actually, through the Young Writers Contest. They used to have Channel 7 and West Australian had that. This is a long time ago now. So that's how I started, and then just kept sending to magazines and sent a manuscript to Fremantle Press. So. And then did other things elsewhere overseas and so on. But yeah, basically through magazines. I grew up in the outer suburbs, so I wasn't very much connected to what was going on in the city. I came from sort of Armidale, Kelmscott area. Because poetry doesn't bring in a large amount of money for the publishers, it can be quite hard for poetry books to get published at all, which is why you see a lot of the self-made chapbooks and so on. So that's probably what it is, finding someone that you can consistently stay with. The thing that's been valuable to me with Fremantle Press is the consistently being with the same people, so that you actually develop, and a lot of poets I think have to hop around from publisher to publisher finding just someone who will bring out their book, because it's not a big money spender for the publishers. But I think it's an important measure of quality with the press if they're serious about the written word. If they support and foster poetry, it's kind of at the core of literature for me. I think I'm probably more of a print person, but that's to do with possibly the generation I grew up in. That's been, say, in my lifetime, a big change, but I think it's great. I mean, it has its hazards like any kind of publishing, but, if you've got good sort of filters for quality, there's some really good stuff on there. I mean, it opens up the possibility for people to put their own stuff up there that hasn't ever been assessed by anyone else. But I think that things find their own level, and everyone gets to say, okay, this magazine is a quality one, and that one maybe is a bit more beginnerish or whatever. I think that the two complement each other quite nicely. I think the really standout, apart from their own natural talent, the really standout thing with these three poets was the evidence that they're strong readers, that they're aware of what's going on in the world of poetry. They read other poets, contemporary poets, older poets, and I think the best way you can improve your own work, it's like with any art form. If you want to be a musician, you have to know your music, you have to know what's out there, and it's the same with poetry. You have to read what's around. Yeah. It was a fantastic experience. First at the level of reading through all the poems that came in, not just from those poets, because there's a lot of incredible material out there and lots of people, many more people writing poetry than people think. But the three that we ended up choosing, I think, are really impressive, very mature for people early in their careers. The writing's really very fully formed, and also just to have that dialogue with them, sitting one-to-one and working through, reading the poems, getting a bit of background and putting in my own take on things. I think we worked fairly flexibly together, and I'm certainly really happy with the outcome, and I think they are too. It's lengthy in the sense that you have first that solitary thing of reading through again and again on your own and deciding what you think before you actually speak to them. Then we had a bit of email contact as well, particularly with Emma because she was in the eastern states, and then I met her over here. But the one-on-one process for me is the most interesting, because you get a lot of feedback. What you might have thought was going on in a poem, there's always another dimension is added when you talk with the poet. And just also to see it coming through as a whole, because although they're very different poets, you want the book somehow to sit together in a way that works as one book of three collections. Yeah.